Good morning, everyone. Today marks a historical opportunity during Black History Month, which was the historical national consultation between Black Canadian Civil Society Coalition and members of the United Nations Permanent Forum on People of African Descent. This visit was not symbolic, it was substantive. It was policy-focused, and it was about international human rights law. This consultation spans 3 major cities, Toronto, Halifax, Wolville, and, in conclusion, Ottawa this afternoon, including online submission from across Canada, contributing to shaping the UN draft declaration, which will become an international human rights instrument. This consultation across 3 major cities was intended to contribute to the draft of the UN Declaration on the promotion, protection, and full respect of the human right of people of African descent. The declaration has the potential to shape global standard on recognition, reparatory justice, economic inclusion, and accountability. But we are clear about one thing today. International law must translate into domestic change. During this consultation, 3 themes emerged, clearly from communities across Canada. First, systematic anti-Black racism remains entrenched across employment systems. Second, Black Canadians continue to experience overrepresentation and inequitable treatment across the justice system. Third, symbolic commitment without enforceable accountability mechanisms have failed our communities before. This is why today we are issuing clear call to action. Modernize and strengthen the Employment Equity Act to explicitly and measurably address anti-Black discrimination, fully implement Canada's Black Justice Strategy with timeline, funding, and independent accountability. Align Canada's domestic policy framework with an emerging UN Declaration for Human Rights of People of African Descent. We are demanding full human rights protection consistent with Canada's international and legal obligations in this country. This consultation signals something important. Black Canadian voices are now firmly embedded in global human rights architecture. Canada has an opportunity to lead, not rhetorically, but structurally. We expect action. Thank you. And I'll pass the mic now to Nicholas Marcus Thompson, one of our co-founders of the Black Canadian Civil Society Coalition.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Hodan. Good morning, members of the media and to the Canadian viewing public. My name is Nicholas Marcus Thompson, and I'm President and CEO of the Black Class Action Secretariat. And as Hodan mentioned, my organization is a member of the coalition that has organized this UN visit to Canada. And greetings to my colleagues on stage from various parts of the country, Bernadeth, Betchi from Ottawa, and Bernadette Hamilton from Halifax, and my colleague Lerato Chondoma from also from Halifax. So this month is really a time to reflect on history, and it's also a time to confront the present realities of structural change. And during this consultation held throughout several cities in Canada, we heard one repeated theme, and that is employment. We heard that Black workers from across sectors continue to face exclusion from opportunities, exclusion and barriers from hiring and advancement, and persistent patterns of being overlooked or stalled in lower wage roles. These concerns were not confined to one workplace or one industry. So employment inequality remains one of the clearest expressions of systemic anti-Black discrimination in Canada. And the impact to that has been devastating on the Black communities. And to be clear, that has led to lower and unstable income, increased housing insecurity, higher financial stress, poor physical and mental outcomes, and also in retirement. So what we've heard throughout this consultation from Black workers is that they are faced with indignity throughout their working life, and also in retirement, they continue to face indignity. And that has led also to generational, limited generational mobility. And the Federal Employment Equity Act, when it comes to that, the federal government is the largest employer in the country. The Employment Equity Act is the single most significant piece of legislation governing equitable access across sectors. It covers over 1 million workers, including the federal public service, crown corporations, banking, telecommunications, transportation, airlines, railway, and other major industries. So these sectors shape wages, leadership representation, and economic mobility across Canada. And that's why we are focusing on the Employment Equity Act today, based on the calls that we've heard from Black people across Canada. And when it comes to this piece of legislation, I'm just going to give a brief history because this piece of legislation has been under review since 2021. The Adele Blackett Employment Equity Task Force report laid out clear recommendations, and chief among them was the formal recognition of Black workers as an employment equity group, aligning fully with the United Nations Decade for People of African Descent, grounded in justice, recognition, and development. So there has been acknowledgement, there has been promise. So today, the Black Canadian Civil Society Coalition, we are calling on the Government of Canada to enact the recommendations of the Adele Blackett Employment Equity Act Task Force report to formally recognize Black workers within the Employment Equity Act and to table these modernizations in the next federal budget. If Canada acknowledges systemic anti-Black discrimination, then our laws must directly address it. In closing, Black History Month must be more than a reflection. It must produce tangible results for Black communities. Thank you.
Introduce Lerato Chondoma, who is a member of our Black Civil Society Coalition, to come to the stage.
Thank you, Hodan, and good morning. My name is Lerato Chondoma. I'm a director of the Black Canadian Civil Society Coalition. I'm also the Associate Vice President for Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Anti-Racism at Acadia University in the Annapolis Valley in Nova Scotia. Canada's justice system rests on the promise of fairness and equality before the law. The evidence shows that this promise has not yet been realized equally for people of African descent and Black Canadians. Across regions and generations, the record is consistent. People of African descent and Black Canadians are racially profiled more often than their white counterparts. They are stopped by police at disproportionate rates. They are denied bail more frequently. They receive harsher sentences in comparable cases, and they're overrepresented in prisons across this country. These are not isolated incidents. They're documented patterns that are confirmed by decades of research, public inquiries, and government data. Canada acknowledged this reality through the development of the Black Justice Strategy. The strategy names anti-Black racism, it recognizes overrepresentation, and outlines reforms across policing, courts, and corrections. That acknowledgement reflects meaningful engagement with Black communities, advocates, and justice experts nationwide. But acknowledgement alone does not change legal outcomes. At present, the Black Justice Strategy remains only a policy framework. It signals commitment, but it is yet to be fully integrated into the criminal code or into binding judicial directives. Judges are not legally required to consider anti-Black systemic harm when making decisions at bail or sentencing. Anti-Black racism is not formally recognized within sentencing law. As a result, implementation depends on discretion rather than enforceable obligation. Experience shows that durable reform in justice systems occurs when principles are embedded in legislation. And Canada has already demonstrated this. When Indigenous over-incarceration was recognized as a legal crisis, and a national crisis, Parliament amended the Criminal Code through Section 718.2e. Courts are required to consider systemic and historical factors in sentencing. The legislative change made structural harm legally relevant. It shaped judicial reasoning, and it established accountability within the legal framework. This legislative model provides a clear example of how systemic inequities can be addressed through law in Canada. There is no constitutional barrier preventing the Government of Canada from adopting this approach to address anti-Black racism. The authority exists, the research base is well established, and the Black Justice Strategy has already articulated the problem and the need for reform. Today, we're calling on the Government of Canada for 4 concrete measures. First, we're calling on the Government of Canada to embed directive in the Criminal Code that requires courts to consider anti-Black systemic factors. Second, we're calling on the Government of Canada to create a formal justice reporting mechanism that provides courts with structured, community-informed analysis. Third, we call on the Government of Canada to mandate judicial consideration of anti-Black racism at both bail and sentencing stages. And fourth, we call on the Government of Canada to establish statutory recognition of anti-Black systemic harm with sentencing law so that structural discrimination is explicitly acknowledged as legally relevant. These reforms are legally feasible and aligned with Canada's domestic and international human rights obligations. They represent the necessary shift from policy recognition to legal accountability. People of African descent and Black Canadians are not asking for special treatment. They're asking for a justice system that reflects documented realities and responds with structural reform. We understand the problem. We've identified a legislative path forward. What remains is the Canadian government's political will to act. Thank you.
Thank you, Lerato. Now I'm going to introduce Bernadeth Betchi, who would be speaking to summarize some of the key points here in French.
Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Je m'appelle Bernadeth Betchi, directrice de l'éducation et de la mobilisation au secrétariat du recours collectif des Noirs et aussi directrice collaborative ici à la coalition. Alors, ça me fait plaisir de m'entretenir devant vous ce matin. Aujourd'hui marque la conclusion d'une consultation nationale historique entre la société civile noire du Canada et les membres du Forum permanent des Nations unies sur les personnes d'ascendance africaine. Cette visite n'était ni symbolique ni protocolaire. Elle était substantielle. Elle a été rigoureusement axée sur les politiques publiques. Et surtout, elle s'est inscrite dans le cadre du droit international des droits de la personne. Cette consultation s'est déroulée dans 3 grandes villes du pays et s'est enrichie des soumissions en ligne provenant des communautés noires dans l'ensemble du Canada. Ensemble, ces contributions participent directement à l'élaboration du projet de déclaration des Nations unies qui deviendra un instrument international en matière des droits humains. Cette déclaration a le potentiel de redéfinir les normes mondiales en matière de reconnaissance, de justice réparatrice, d'inclusion économique et de mécanismes et de reddition des comptes. Au terme de cette consultation nationale, un constat s'impose avec clarté. Ce qui s'est amorcé ici dépasse un simple exercice de dialogue. Il s'agit d'un moment de consolidation politique, juridique et historique pour les communautés noires au Canada. Partout où nous avons été, dans les salles de consultation, dans les espaces communautaires et à travers les nombreuses contributions reçues en ligne, une même réalité a été exprimée. Les personnes noires au Canada veulent être reconnues et vivre avec dignité. Les échanges avec le Forum permanent des Nations unies sur les personnes d'ascendance africaine ont permis de faire converger les réalités vécues sur le terrain avec les standards émergents du droit international. Cette convergence est essentielle. Elle garantit que déclaration ne sera pas détachée des réalités nationales, mais qu'elle reflètera des expériences concrètes, documentées et portées collectivement. Ce processus a également mis en lumière une maturité politique indéniable des communautés noires canadiennes. Les revendications exprimées ne révèlent pas de l'abstraction. Elles sont précises, elles sont structurées et ancrées dans des solutions, des données probantes, des mécanismes de suivi, des obligations claires et des responsabilités définies. Il a été clairement établi que les inégalités en emploi, les écarts économiques persistants et les disparités dans le système de justice ne sont pas des anomalies, mais les résultats prévisibles des structures qui n'ont pas été suffisamment modernisées pour répondre aux réalités contemporaines. Alors, dans ce contexte, l'équité en emploi occupe une place centrale. Le Canada s'est engagé à faire évoluer ce cadre législatif. Les communautés noires attendent désormais que ces engagements se traduisent par des réformes tangibles, capables de corriger les désavantages systémiques et de garantir un accès équitable aux opportunités, à la progression professionnelle et à la sécurité économique. Ce compte-rendu se veut également un rappel. La crédibilité internationale du Canada en matière des droits humains repose sur sa capacité à aligner ses engagements globaux avec ses politiques internes. L'adoption future de la Déclaration des Nations unies représente une occasion stratégique de renforcer cette cohérence. Enfin, cette consultation a réaffirmé une vérité fondamentale. Les communautés noires au Canada ne sont pas en marge des processus décisionnels internationaux. Elles y participent activement, elles y contribuent intellectuellement et elles y inscrivent leur réalité. Ce moment n'est pas une conclusion, il constitue un point d'ancrage. La suite dépendra de la volonté politique de transformer les paroles en politique et les politiques en résultats mesurables. Les communautés noires resteront mobilisées, vigilantes et engagées. Merci.
Thank you, Bernadeth. I just wanted to say a few final words. In recent speeches, Canada's political leadership has spoken about the importance of international cooperation, rule-based global order, and democratic accountabilities. Those principles are welcomed. However, international credibility begins at home. Canada cannot speak confidently about global human rights leadership while systematic anti-Black racism remains insufficiently addressed through enforceable domestic law. We have yet to see clear, measurable alignment between high-level commitment to international law and concrete structural reform addressing anti-Black racism, anti-Black discrimination in particular, in Canada. This is not about rhetorics, it's about implementation. In Canada, if Canada wants credibility on the global stage, it must demonstrate measurable commitment to confronting systematic anti-Black racism, as my fellow colleagues have spoken about in employment, in the criminal justice system. Domestically, through enforceable employment equity, reform, full implementation of the Black Justice Strategy beyond a recommendation, leadership is not defined by speeches abroad, but by justice delivered at home. Thank you.
We do not have any journalists joining us online, so if there's anything else you'd like to add.
We're good. We're good.
This concludes the press conference.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.